All right, so I'm going to talk about how children learn to talk about the mind. So we have this really remarkable ability as humans, maybe as adult humans, that we can think about our thoughts. So we can do this meta-representational reasoning. And this is related to our general theory of mind abilities. So this is how we know that we have internal states that are different from the out there world. We have our in there world, and these can be our feelings, our thoughts, our beliefs, our knowledge, and we're really going to talk about knowledge. We're focusing on that one. And not only that, we know that we have thoughts, and we know that our thoughts can change. We know that other people have thoughts that can be the same or different as ours, that can be wrong. You can hold false beliefs. So we really have this really remarkable ability to think this way. And I'm going to call this meta-representational thinking. And shorthand, we can think about thinking. And this is a remarkable ability that human beings have. Here's a little graphic of it. So this little boy is reading a book about dinosaurs, and that dinosaur has an inner state about how much he loves meat, and the little boy can think about that dinosaur's inner state. And so I'm going to represent this meta-representational thinking with thought bubbles within thought bubbles. And of course we can do this about our own thoughts and also about the thoughts of others. So how do we talk about this? Well, we use epistemic language. And epistemic is based on a word that's from the Greek for knowledge. So we can talk about what we know, and we use particular kinds of epistemic talk. We can do this with belief verbs, so these are embedding verbs like think or know or believe. We can do this with epistemic adverbs. So these are adverbs like maybe or probably. And we can do this with epistemic uses of modal verbs, and these are auxiliary verbs in English. So for example, T-Rex might be hungry. And notice that we can express the same, there are some differences, but we're abstracting away from those. We can express the same meta-representational concepts, this thinking about thinking, using different grammatical strategies. So I can say, I think T-Rex is hungry. You know, I think T-Rex is hungry. I can also say T-Rex might be hungry, might be T-Rex is hungry, and I can say maybe T-Rex is hungry. So like theory of mind, grammatical knowledge also develops over early life. So both theory of mind abilities and linguistic abilities develop in parallel in the developing child. So we also come to be able to talk about what we know, right? So let's say dinosaurs can talk, and dinosaur says, I love meat. And then this little boy can say, I know that T-Rex loves meat. And it can also be, so this is a state about T-Rex, and the child can represent that state. And notice that the complement to I know is literally the thought that the child is thinking about. T-Rex loves meat. Belief verbs are very nice like that. So here's our really big question. When do children first link epistemic thoughts to linguistic symbols? So here's a really hard kind of thought. When do kids map this to language? Prior literature, so the vast majority of literature looking at this has looked at belief verbs and modal verbs. Oh, I called them, they're also called mental verbs here. So like think and know and must be or could be. And what we found is when you look at children's production, so when they spontaneously start using these words, they use these with modal verbs in their epistemic uses and belief verbs from age 3 or 4, depending on which one you're looking at and which language you're looking at. And prior research, dating back to the 1970s, and certainly still the dominant view, has overwhelmingly linked this finding that these appear somewhat late, at age 3 or 4. That's late for learning the meaning of a word. And of course, this is taking production to reflect learning. So prior researchers overwhelmingly argue that this is linked to theory of mind development. So basically, there's this lack of epistemic talk using belief verbs or epistemic modal verbs until age 3 or 4 because these kids are conceptually limited. So in answer to when do children first link epistemic thoughts to linguistic symbols, the overwhelming answer in the literature is when they're conceptually able to. And this is intuitive because this is a really hard kind of thinking, right? So we're talking about probably the hardest kind of thinking that humans can do, thinking about thinking. But in the rest of this talk, I'm going to talk about grammatical complexity. So grammatical complexity of belief verbs and epistemic uses of modal verbs. And then I'm also going to talk about modal adverbs that have relatively few grammatical restrictions. These are easy words. And I'm going to argue for a different answer. When kids first start talking about epistemic, when they first start linking epistemic language to epistemic thoughts, is when they're grammatically able to. So one thing that we found out recently in the past decade or so, since the bulk of the literature on this question, we found out babies are much smarter than we thought. So using implicit measures, we found out that 12-month-olds are able to engage in possibility reasoning, so thinking about what may be true or false. And 15 and 24-month-olds exhibit at least precursors, if not the real adult thing, to belief reasoning. So reasoning about what other people, how they behave based on what they probably think, what they know, what knowledge they have access to. So that's just a precursor to say, maybe the concepts are in place much earlier, and this, what children lack is the language to express these thoughts. So first, let's look at the sets of words that people have mostly looked at to explore this question of when do children first link up language to epistemic thought. Well, both epistemic modal verbs and belief verbs, so that is both think and know and must be and could be, are conceptually hard, like any kind of epistemic. Oh, this just went out, hold on. I lost my view, sorry. Okay. Oh, it's touchscreen. Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah. Oh, but it's in the wrong place. Backspace, there we go. We're good? We're good, okay, sorry. But these are also, it's confounded by grammatical complexity. These are also grammatically hard. So these epistemic talk strategies rely on embedding. So they rely on sentential embedding of two different kinds. With belief verbs like think, this is really, really obvious. These embed CPs. With epistemic uses of modal verbs like T-Rex might be hungry, what you hear on the surface kind of hides that this involves a kind of sentential embedding, which is TP embedding. Because what we're really understanding there, when we get to the semantics, is we're getting, in the epistemic uses of these, we're understanding it in a way like might be T-Rex is hungry, where we are qualifying, so we're thinking about qualifying our thought that T-Rex is hungry. So both of these kinds of ways of talking about epistemic thoughts, or encoding epistemic thoughts, involve sentential embedding. And remember I said these come online in production about age 3 and age 4? Well, that's exactly when these kinds of cross-linguistically, across many children, when these kinds of syntactic embedding come online. So TP embedding is robust around age 3, and CP embedding, really what we think of when we think of sentential embedding, come online in children's productive language around age 4. So, okay, what about, are there ways where we can, are there grammatical strategies for expressing epistemic thoughts that are easier? And both the literal and figurative answer here is maybe. So epistemic adverbs like maybe or probably are grammatically adjuncts. So that means that you can put them in different places in the sentence. So maybe T-Rex is maybe hungry, maybe, and they can stand alone. Is T-Rex hungry? Maybe. So what I think these allow us to do is strip away grammatical complexity, but still have a way that adults are able to express this complex epistemic thought. So it's still conceptually complex. So adverbs may be an easier way for small children to begin to link epistemic thoughts to language because they're linguistically simpler. And this is what we find. So toddlers say maybe by age 2, and they do this across many languages. So here's an example of Norwegian maybe. Maybe he is sitting there eating coffee. Of French maybe, ça peut-être c'est un poisson. That's maybe it's a fish. English maybe grandma made this. And Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian, maybe, možda. So maybe it's over there in the room. Notice all these kids are in their early 2s. So the oldest one here is the Norwegian one at 2 years, 6 months. So this is up to a full year in advance of them using epistemic modal verbs and in using belief verbs. So maybe grandma made this. So this is an actual example from a child at 2 years old. And what she's doing when she says that is she's looking at this craft that her grandma made, and then she's qualifying that. So the one thought that's represented is grandma made this toy, but then maybe grandma made this toy. So it's possibly true, grandma made this toy. So summing up, epistemic language is meta-representational. Epistemic thought, and in turn epistemic language is meta-representational. So it linguistically represents what are our thoughts about thoughts, and this is definitely hard thinking. But when we peel away grammatical complexity associated with canonical ways of expressing epistemic thoughts, which are the belief verbs and the epistemic modal verbs, we find children may demonstrate the ability to use epistemic talk from as early as age 2. And then taking seriously advancements in our understanding of theory of mind-related conceptual abilities, so we've been able to show that babies are smarter than we thought, they may have these thoughts in place, and then this question of when do kids link language to these kinds of thoughts is related to how easy is it to figure out the meaning of that word in the language I'm hearing. And I think this is a lot more transparent and less prior grammatical learning needs to happen for epistemic adverbs, and these occur from age 2, these are adjuncts, and then epistemic modal verbs occur in production from age 3, and belief verbs from age 3 or 4.